state of Ukrainian and Russian forces ahead of a Ukrainian spring offensive and appear to outline U.S. training and equipment being provided to Ukraine ahead of that offensive. There are also suggestions that Ukraine's Air Force may not be able to withstand more Russian attacks. Other leaked material included intelligence on other countries, such as China, Israel, and South Korea. Officials say they do not currently know the source of the leaks. The BBC's Barbara Platt-Usher has more.
The Pentagon says the U.S. is still very much in the finding out phase. We're told that this is a serious risk to U.S. national security and that it is a matter of top priority. A number of government agencies are working together to try to find out how this happened and what the potential impact is. The Secretary of Defense is meeting every day with senior leaders, and U.S. officials are holding high-level talks to try to reassure allies, because a number of these documents mentioned U.S. allies such as Israel and South Korea, including some very sensitive information. But most of the documents refer to the status of the war in Ukraine. The Department of Justice has opened up a criminal investigation. The Americans don't know who's behind this, or at least they're not saying. They also don't know the scope of it. The spokesman for the National Security Council was asked whether the threat had been contained, and he said, well, we just don't know. Now, these are not detailed Ukraine battle plans. This is more like a U.S. snapshot of the Ukraine war. But it could give the Russians useful information. It could also put at risk some of the U.S. intelligence sources. And it's a diplomatic embarrassment.
Officials say these documents are, for the most part, real. But earlier, the White House's John Kirby also said this.
It does appear that at least in some cases, the information posted online had been altered from what we think would be the original source. But there's just no way I can tell you with any granularity right now how that came to be.
I spoke with the chairman of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee, Representative Mike Turner, who was briefed on the leak.
I do think that there is a way, and we certainly are through the Department of Justice and through the Department of Defense trying to track this down. Certainly both the documents itself have limited circulation. They've been appearing in photographs, some of which, of course, have electronic signature aspects. They can help lead us to, where this leak may have occurred, where these documents have come from. And of course, our goal there is to stop it. But you're absolutely right in your report. You guys were saying that, this is just a limited snapshot. It's a static image of the Ukraine conflict. It is not at all something that is dynamic. Our ability to be flexible, Ukraine's ability to be flexible in its attempts to rebuff the Russian aggression against them is certainly not stopped by this.
It is a static image, but it does also reveal some important information about the war in Ukraine. One of the revelations is that Ukraine's Air Force may not be able to stand up to Russia should they intensify air battles. And we know that the Biden administration has now promised another $2.6 billion aid package, including some support for air defense. Is that going to be enough?
Well, assuming that even that is static. I mean, what you were referring to is the document that was talking about the consumption rate of air defenses and what the status would be over time for those. But again, that's just of a period of time. We're continuing, the NATO allies are continuing to supply both weapons and capabilities that would backfill those capabilities. So Russia should not by any means look at these documents and think, hey, as of this date, we now have freedom to be able to move into and about Ukraine. That's not the case. And I was just in Ukraine and meeting with our NATO allies and our officials there on both logistics, planning, and on training. And there's a great deal of effort on support for Ukraine. And these documents, I think, show the extent of the continued cooperation, coordination, but certainly would not represent a vulnerability.
I want to ask you about what we also saw in these documents. The New York Times reporting that the Russian mercenary group Wagner, they have been fighting against Ukraine, of course, met with Turkish contacts as a part of a bid to expand their influence and also to search in part for more weapons. What do you make of them meeting with contacts from a NATO member state?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to comment on that. Again, some of these documents have not been verified. I'm certainly not going to discuss the aspects like that. But I think your point, though, in your question, which is discussable, is are the Russians out looking for weapons? And that clearly is the case. We saw when President Xi came to Russia that they're looking for Chinese weapons. We know that they've been looking around the world for weapons. And I think that shows a greater vulnerability on the part of Russia that they would prefer that people not understand. And that is that they're running out of weapons, they're running out of capabilities. And certainly, since they're not able to advance the eastern front line against Ukraine, it's certainly showing failure on the part of the Russian military.
Is it also showing that sanctions from the West are working?
Well, absolutely, because and that's an excellent point, Sumi, and that is that the sanctions prevent them from having access to advanced technology that they could incorporate into additional weapons that they could manufacture themselves. But and also it lessens their overall capital that they could apply to manufacturing of weapons and capabilities. But I think this also goes to the issue of just the unbelievable consumption that's happening of their weapon systems. I mean, the number of tanks that they've lost is unbelievable. Certainly was not expected by Putin. And in their whole weapon systems, they're seeing it that they're being much less effective than they had expected. But also the one thing aspect of this, even though we're talking about United States leaking of classified information, we've certainly seen that Russia, almost like a sieve, I mean, Putin has got to be sitting there, at times in the Kremlin, looking to his left and his right and wondering who his friends are, because the information that comes out of Russia is so actionable and has certainly helped the Ukrainians and NATO and the United States.
I want to come back to the state of play in the war in Ukraine right now, because even though you said this is a static shot of what is happening, what is the impact of these leaks? I mean, what can Russian intelligence, for example, gain from these documents?
Sure. Well, there is some information in this that could be concerning and that could be viewed as strategic information. What we have to be concerned with is, again, making certain that Ukraine in its plans over the next couple months it is flexible, that it has that versatility and that the weapons capabilities that the NATO and NATO allies, the United States, provide. We know certainly of German Leopard tanks that are on their way, are being able to put to their best use. So as this information is out, certainly Ukraine is going to have to modify and look to its plans. But again, this is a land war, and as a land war, a lot of anything that happens on the ground is visible to Russia, and they're going to have some advance notice of these events anyway. But this certainly causes pause, and I think a reconfiguration of perhaps the goals and objectives.
And it's certainly a big intelligence leak. I mean, does there need to be a review of who has clearances for these types of documents, who has access?
Well, this certainly is very concerning that these documents would have been leaked. There certainly is an inventory of an understanding of who has access to them. So we're going to be working diligently to find who would have had these documents and who might have leaked them in this situation. And certainly, this is espionage, and if it turns out to be American, that they are a traitor and they will be held to justice.
Chairman Turner, while we have you here, I also want to ask you about China, because we've seen Chinese warships essentially encircle Taiwan in a response to the Taiwanese president meeting with the U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy here in the U.S. China said it has successfully completed 3 days of military drills. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it continues to show that as an authoritarian regime, they are threatening Taiwan, which is a thriving democracy. It certainly was startling, I think, to everyone that when China reacted to Nancy Pelosi as speaker going to Taiwan, and then now is reacting to the president of Taiwan meeting in the United States with the Speaker of the U.S. House in the United States. So clearly they see their reach, their ability to have a fence or a pretext for these exercises and these really provocative moves as threatening to them. And clearly, the freedom part of being able to be free and meet with whoever you want, they certainly don't understand.
That may be the case, Chairman Turner, but if we see these type of provocative military drills, as you just call them, is there perhaps some room for reconsidering these types of meetings if they're going to trigger that kind of response from China?
Well, there is no triggering of China. China has been planning this for a long time, and they've openly stated so. President Xi has been saying that he wanted his military to plan to, even if necessary, to take Taiwan from military force. So this is all a pretext. Certainly, I think, in the United States, we can't start saying people who are in the United States that we're not going to meet with them because we might offend China. That's not the issue here. The issue here is that China is an authoritarian regime, and they're going to try to suppress democracies, including actions in our own country.
Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner, with us. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.